Okay. Thank you, members. It's 2 o'clock, so we're starting the meeting. First agenda item is minutes of the previous meeting. Do any members have any issues with regards to the minutes of the previous meeting? If not, do I have a proposer to approve the minutes as being an accurate record? Thank you, Councillor Taylor, and seconded by Councillor Rose. All in favour? Is
clearly carried. Thank you, Chair.
Item 2, urgent business. I have an item of urgent business that we need to bring before the Audit Committee today. It has been distributed in a separate format on ModGov under the governance review section. So for those members, if you're on ModGov and you're looking for where the item is, it's under governance review. And under the item stated there is on community housing, and the Audit Committee is to consider the learning from the governance review of the community housing programme and its application to the Council's wider programme management functions. Do we have any questions from members of the committee who would like to raise questions or issues on that? Yeah. Okay, I'll just give members a second to just get the right papers. It's the separate paper on community housing under governance review. It's actually down as agenda item number 11, but I'm bringing it up under urgent business, which is why we're discussing it to start off with.
Chair, at this stage, Councillor Pearce has asked if you'd like it to do an introduction.
Yes. Councillor Pearce, would you like to introduce the governance review?
Thank you very much, everybody. Can you hear me all right? Can you hear me? Okay. Can you hear me in the room?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Councillor.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you, Chairman. Okay. This paper was presented to the executive, and I'll give you the same introduction as I gave them. Fortunately, this is not the sort of report that comes before you very often, but nevertheless, it's one which is important both for what it reveals, but most importantly for the reassurance that the mistakes that have been recognised and steps have largely been taken to remedy them. Good governance is now established in the programme, and there is a list of further recommendations for improvement at section 10 at the end of the report. The report highlights the lack of SLT capacity and the consequent excessive pressure at the time on ELT. But I would go further and say that the style of this programme was established long before the Community Housing Fund monies were received, but just became magnified as the number of projects mushroomed. Because it was effectively being run as a separate module, any officers presently in post or any lead members, I can well see, were not privy to what was going on. The officers responsible have now left the council. We should therefore very much look on this as a paper which recognises past errors, but in the new council, with a now largely reformed constitution and a much tighter grip on good governance and good decision making, sets out not only to put past errors right, but to establish an effective framework to take the programme forward confidently with all the proper checks and balances in place. This paper, as you will see, is only for noting, as the majority of work to sort out residual problems has already happened, and the further recommendations will be followed up and implemented by officers. A roundup of the status of the various community housing projects has already been discussed by the executive. Because this report largely deals with governance issues, it's right that it should come before you at the Audit Committee, Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. Councillor Spencer would like to comment on the report.
Thank you, Chairman. The report was a very interesting report. It's very clear that a lot of hard work and effort has gone into it. It's clear that there were a number of errors as they've been described, but certainly a number of points that needed to be addressed. And I was very impressed by the openness and honesty of the report. and it's very clear that a review was necessary, and the review, to my mind, was thorough and wide-ranging. I did have some comments to make about 2 additional things, if it's okay to raise it at this point. One was that the recommendations in the list of items in 10.2 seemed to me to be very sensible and very appropriate in the circumstances. And I wondered if 2 things. One, that there could be some timescales attached to them, which I know is an extremely difficult thing, but nonetheless might have the effect of concentrating the mind. And secondly, that we could have a further update on those 10.2 reports at a subsequent meeting to be decided. They were my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spencer. Is that a recommendation that you're putting before the Audit Committee?
Yeah.
An amendment to the recommendation. Would you like to clarify it again, just so that Mr. White can confirm the exact wording, Mr. White?
First was to apply a timescale to the items identified in 10.2 to be decided. And secondly, for a further update to be provided. I know that this is part of a regular update, but a further update to be provided perhaps at the next audit meeting, or which I know is quite congested, or at a subsequent meeting. Thank you.
Do we have a seconder for the recommendation?
Sorry, can you just Barry's recommendation?
Yeah, Mr. White, would you be able to sort of either put it on a screen or send it to members or repeat it verbally?
I can repeat it verbally, Chair. The 2 recommendations are to apply timescales to the points identified at section 10.2 of the agenda report, and 2, that a further update be provided to a future audit committee meeting.
I'll happily second those.
So seconded by Councillor Brazil, recommendation put forward by Councillor Spencer. Would any members like to debate the recommendation that is before the committee at the moment? Councillor Rose.
Yes, well, to apply timescales, but what timescales? And to me, it's a bit airy-fairy, but I'm not quite sure what it actually means, apart from the timescale, bring back to the next meeting, future meetings. How long of time span are we going to allow, please?
Yeah, Mr. Bates, would you like to just comment on it?
Yes, I'll happily comment, Chair. No problem at all. So I think we can absolutely put some timescales on the actions, and there's no reason why we can't do that as an officer team reasonably quickly and circulate that under separate cover to the committee. I would suggest that in terms of the reporting back, we do that at a time when we can confirm that the actions taken in the report are established practice within the programme. So I think that hopefully will help, Chairman, and members will get an update on the specific timescales sooner that way.
Any other comments from members of the committee on the recommendation? Yes, Councillor Brazil.
Sorry, the recommendation
that Councillor Spencer.
Well, no, I mean, I take Rose's.
Okay, Councillor Spencer.
Yeah, I think what I was trying to say was that at the moment there's nothing there to indicate when these actions may be taken by or completed by, and that perhaps that can be discussed if necessary or agreed on a timescale. Rose, I don't have a timescale to allocate to them because I'm not sufficiently knowledgeable to know about the work involved, but it seems to me that an action point that has a timescale concentrates the mind.
Thank you, Councillor Rose again.
Yes, well, there isn't a time. The time scale is how long. It's not said we will report back in 6 months or this time next year. We haven't got a time scale. It's just elastic. It could be as long as it takes. We don't know how long it's going to take. That's my view. And I think if we say report back in 6 months' time, you might not have done much work in 6 months' time. But if we could know a time when it could be brought back to us, then I think we would feel more confident. Thank you.
Councillor Spencer, would you be happy with 6 months as a time frame?
if that's what it would, I'd like to see it as a time frame that's agreed by all parties, i.e. the audit committee on the one hand thinking that that's okay, and the officers on the other hand thinking that it's got to be achievable, it's got to be realistic. And as I say, I don't have that degree of knowledge to be able to allocate a time frame, but I think as Andy said, that it should be easily achievable. So I'm happy to abide by higher opinion.
Mr. Bates?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just to reiterate, I'm more than happy that we will provide some timescales against each of the items in 10.2. We'll provide that under separate cover to members of this committee. I'm also happy that we report back to this committee on progress with regard to these programme management issues in 6 months' time. I think that would be appropriate and give us chance to ensure that the changes are embedded and bring a useful report back. Chairman, thank you.
As your internal auditor, if this had been an internal audit report, I know we had some, input into this. I would expect an action plan to have target dates, as we call them, and some of these might be quick wins. Others, take a while to come to fruition, and therefore, as the chief exec says, I think progress with see how far you've got in 6 months. Don't expect them all to have been done in 6 months, but certainly, realistic timescales should be set.
Are we looking at amending the recommendation then to include 6 months as a time frame, or leave it as it stands? Councillor Spencer.
I think in terms of a report back to this committee, 6 months, I know March is a really congested meeting, so that's maybe not an ideal time. I don't actually know off the top of my head what the next date is, but certainly that one at the latest. In terms of the points 10 to 10.2, then some of them will take 5 minutes and some might take 5 months or something. So that's what I mean by not being able to allocate or suggest something for those. So I think as far as 10.2 is concerned, individual timescales for those with an update at the end of 6 months.
Well, we have a recommendation before the committee at the moment. As it stands, it's been put forward to the committee and seconded. So we've debated it. I think we've been fairly clear on what kind of time frame we're expecting from the officers, and that they'll get back to us within that sort of time frame. So what I'm suggesting is that we put the recommendation that's before the committee to the vote now. So all those in favour of the recommendation, Councillor Brazil.
Sorry, yes, sorry. Yeah, just so we're voting on Barry's recommendations that I've seconded. That's just as an amendment to the recommendations there. So once if we agree those, then we can then talk about the whole paper. Okay.
Yeah, I'll give you the opportunity to comment on the paper.
I'm
not going to just cut it off at that point.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
So based on the recommendations that have been put forward to the committee by Councillor Spencer, just that part. All those in favour?
Sorry, Chair, do you want me to read them out just for absolute belt and braces?
Yeah, please do.
So it's 2 parts, members. Part 1 being that officers be instructed to apply timescales to those actions identified at section 10.2 of the presented agenda report that will be circulated to committee members outside of this meeting. And 2, that a progress update be provided to the audit committee in 6 months' time.
And we take it that that's been proposed and seconded at this stage. So all those in favour of those recommendations?
That's unanimous. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so having dealt with those 2 specific items on it, are there any other members who would like to comment or question the governance review on community housing programme? Councillor McKay. Need to turn your mic on, Councillor McKay.
Excuse me. Section 1.5. It's a sentence that I'm afraid I just have found it. Is it simple? Yes. Yeah, I find it difficult to parse that sentence at all. It just, what is meant by 1.5?
Do you have another question as well? We'll sort of deal with two at the same time.
Okay, and also 3.4. It talks about recycling costs, and I'm afraid I don't understand what's being said there either.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor McKay.
Then I've got some just general comments, but I mean,
I'll come back to that after I've just clarified
okay.
those first 2 points. So, Mr. Bates, those two questions.
Yes, sorry if the language is confusing. I mean, the simple answer, Councillor McKay, is we were simply trying to do too much all at the same time without a clear plan.
Well, I mean, that pretty much sums up the whole report, isn't it? An admission of that, and I also, you know, these were the comments I was going to make, but it's a lot of it is simply that it would appear to me that there was a couple of officers were let off the leash to go and do this, and there was very little line management in that process, and there's an admission within this, although it's couched in an awful lot of management speak. That's basically what happened. And now you're putting processes in place to make sure that there's clear lines of responsibility and also some proper metrics to the project. That's fine, and I appreciate the honesty, and also what's been put in place will probably fix the problem. My only comment in all of this is that as ever, and it's a comment that I repeat ad nauseum, is that the involvement of members in the whole process. And I've asked on several occasions for there to be an SLT Q&A, you know, on a regular basis, so that members could keep in to quiz what's going on and pass comment, and some of these errors I think would have emerged a lot earlier had such a process been in place. And even now, despite what's being proposed, I don't think members involved anything like sufficient. I mean, just saying that there's going to be something in the weekly bulletin about what goes on and things like that, it's just nothing like sufficient. And it's coming to audit today, that's fine, but it's not going to come to audit again for another 6 months. I think there should be much more member involvement throughout everything that the council does, really, but in very particular cases of how projects like this are managed.
Mr. Bates, would you like to comment on that?
So yes, thank you, Chairman. I'd happily do. So I think, broadly speaking, I'd agree with Councillor McKay that there hasn't been enough involvement of members in this historical programme, and that was true of senior officers' oversight of it and knowledge of the individual projects. The same was true of the lead member and of members generally. I think that's a clear failing, and I accept that. What I would say is it's an historical programme, and there was a separate report which went to the executive at its last meeting that set out within that report an update on each of the housing projects which the council is continuing to progress. So an update was provided. All members can have access to that. It's in the public domain, and we will make sure that in future, as those projects move forward, we are better engaged in terms of conversations with our members, in particular ward councillors, for those communities concerned. So hopefully that answers the question, Chairman.
Okay. Any other members of the committee like to comment? Councillor Brazil.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The two things I'd like is, first of all, to say that I think that this report, if we're dealing just with governance, that's fair enough. There are, and I'm prepared to go along with the recommendations as there are. However, I would say that there are strategic ways that we're looking to deliver this that I don't agree with. But that's not really our job here to do, and that's been agreed at executive. So, I'll just have to get on with that. For example, and I raised it at executive, I don't think that the housing need should be decided by two senior officers. And in that sense, they have they can say yes or no, whether particular projects can go forward. I don't think that's correct, and I don't agree with that. But, that I'll put that aside for the moment. What I do have concerns about this report is that I'm sure that we've looked through it and we have come to the conclusion that this is the way that we stop this happening again in this particular example. But have we learned the lessons in a more holistic view? For example, what was the role of internal audit in this? We had an amount of money just south of £2 million that's now been frittered away to £45,000 and not a single community house out of the ground. You know, did internal audit see that? At what stage did they suddenly think, hang on a sec, there's a few indicators here where, you know, the lights are flashing and thinking we should be doing something like that? External auditors as well. How are they looking at? How are external auditors looking at our accounts and going, oh, there's £2 million for community housing, hasn't delivered a thing, best value for money stamp. Thank you very much. I mean, it doesn't really give me much confidence with both external and internal audit that both of them failed to pick up on what is a huge priority within this council. And there's nothing in the report that talks about that. There's a passing reference to line management saying that they were very busy and there was a lack of capacity. Okay, I'll just about accept that. But I think, again, it's a bit of a whitewash in the sense that senior officers, senior members, executive members with responsibility for this portfolio have allowed this situation to happen. And there's nothing really in there that says that they've got to behave in a different way, other than saying there's going to be a gateway for how we do this particular project. So whereas I'm happy to go along with the recommendations for this case, I do think that there are lessons that don't appear to have been learned. They may have been behind closed doors, and maybe that's not in the report. But I think that as a member, and as a member of the public reading that, I'm thinking, well, hang on a sec. You know, it's a bit like the horse has already bolted and no one's stepped up and said, yeah, that was my responsibility. Actually, I let that go. So those are my comments, really, Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Bates?
Thank you, Chairman. So thank you for your challenges, Councillor Brazil, and again, they are helpful ones, I think. I'll let Dominic come in a minute, but in terms of the challenge around the role of internal audit, Mr. Powell, who conducted the governance review, engaged colleagues from internal audit in that process, and we did that deliberately because of their skills in terms of investigation, presentation of evidence, and indeed collation of recommendations. So whilst this isn't an internal audit report, we did have the benefit of colleagues with those skills. In terms of external audit, it's not really my place to comment, I don't think, other than to say we as a senior leadership team engaged in a thorough process, which was led by Mrs. Buckle in terms of the external audit of the council, and that gave the council a good bill of health. And this programme and the expenditure related to it was part of that. But I can't really go further than that, I think, Chairman. In terms of the other challenge around management, well, you know, I take responsibility for that. I'm the chief executive. This programme started before my time. It was me who initiated the governance review. I think that is demonstrating me taking action on behalf of the council. Now, we have had appropriate discussions within the senior leadership team and beyond that about what we expect from our officers in terms of compliance with the council's procedures for doing things. And I'm confident that people are absolutely clear about my expectation and the council's expectation. I apologise, Chairman, about the past. We can't change that. We can change the future, and I hope that that will satisfy Councillor Brazil.
Mr. Measures, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I take on board Councillor Brazil's comments and so forth. You know, the community housing programme was in last year's audit plan, and we used that time to assist in this review. Elsewhere within, you know, internal audit with other clients on big projects, internal audit will be in there as part of the project team, so that we can assist. Have two hats on. One, looking at the controls of whatever you're developing to make sure that systems, if there's systems being put in place, etc., are going to operate correctly, but also giving assurance over the actual running of the project. So we can see that, you know, you've got the right people there, the roles and responsibilities are set out. Things are minuted, there's risk registers in place. We didn't have that opportunity on this housing programme. And I would look to see if I could be, you know, part of, or my team be part of that on other major projects going forward.
Councillor Brazil?
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful, because I think that sort of, that maybe there should be another recommendation here, and that is that I don't know how to word it or how it would work, and Dominic may be able to tell us how best. But I take on board the fact that he's saying basically we were out in the cold on this one and we didn't know what was going on. And that's probably part of the problems that we managed to get to the situation where we did. And so we must have a mechanism in place that isn't allowed to happen. That internal audit is involved, does see the numbers, does see the outputs and things like that, so that they can take a view on it. Perhaps there should be another recommendation in there about how, that we cannot have what is it? I mean, I'm not going to call it a rogue operation, because that's a sort of emotive language, but that we can't have a sort of silo of operations going on within this council that somehow falls outside the remit of internal audit or doesn't have a view, and that would make me more confident that we won't make this mistake again.
Mr. Bates, would you like to come back on that?
I share Councillor Brazil's view in that internal audit should have freedom to range across the council's functions as a whole. Absolutely. I'm not sure that we particularly need a separate recommendation. I'm confident that SLT, with Mrs. Buckle leading on this, have a very thorough review of the internal audit arrangements and their plan. Mr. Measures puts forward his plan. It's not our plan. He comes forward with his own proposition as to the areas that should be reviewed, and we engage in that process. So in terms of the principle, I absolutely agree. There should be no places within the council that internal audit can't go. I do not believe there are any. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Pearce, you've had your hand up for quite a while there. Is that, would you like to comment on it as the leader of the council?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just to add a few things. First of all, I said advisedly that none of the officers who were initially in charge of this programme are now with the council. This involves the director and two of the housing officers who succeeded each other in the affordable housing programme, which subsequently became the community housing programme, with using the monies that we receive from the community housing fund. So that, I think, is part of the problem, and I am satisfied now that the new chief executive was onto this literally within weeks of being at the council, because I remember him mentioning it to me. And I have to say, at that time, I was surprised, because I didn't realise either what had been going on. And in response to Councillor McKay, I would say that to an extent, some of the problems that arose were because of too much member involvement. In other words, there were members competing to have sites in their wards considered and to have those sites brought forward, to have work done on them to see if they were viable sites. And only some of those sites went through the correct procedures. And it's because of that some of the sites have now not been advanced any further. Whereas in the report that went to the executive, the great majority of them are still on the books and could still be brought forward at some time in the future. But there is a capacity issue in the council, and they will probably have to wait their turn to come forward in due course. So I think there are a number of things, but I certainly am satisfied that even if we haven't got it 100% correct yet, I'm sure we've got it 95% correct. And with the other measures to bring in, I am reassured that I think any project of this type that is initiated by the council will be set on the right footing now with the right governance. And that doesn't just apply to housing, that would apply to anything new that the council starts doing. And there are good there are a good deal of things that the council is doing new, partly in response to the housing crisis and various other things. So there are a lot of things we're tackling at the moment that we haven't actually done as part of the day job before. But I'm happy that the right governance structure is there for those new projects to be brought forward in the right way. And I hope that in time, internal audit will bear that out. Thank you.
Thank you. Do any other members of the committee have any further questions or comments to make on the review? Yeah, Councillor Taylor.
Just a reply really to Julian. Now, these projects that have been brought forward, I mean, they all cost money because surveys get done, and if they can't be built out, and builders, I mean, the developers aren't falling over themselves to do these community housing. And surely when some of them, I mean, I think there's lots in the line now, when they get built out, then we will be able to replenish some of that money that's been just gone out of the 1.9 million that we put forward for community housing. And when the open market houses are sold off those sites, then that money will go back into the fund. Am I correct?
Mr. Bates, would you like to answer?
I'm going to ask Mr. Brooke to answer if that's okay, Chairman. He understands this issue better than me in terms of recycling.
Thank you, Chairman. The principle of that absolutely stands. It's on a site-by-site basis around liability, but absolutely, you spend money up front. You have to ensure that you can understand the challenges of a scheme, and then at the point when that scheme is developed out, you recoup your costs. That's at a very high level the principle, and that would apply to several of the sites that are coming forward. St Anne's Chapel being the obvious example.
Yeah, can you tell us roughly what the total cost of the projects you got in line now would have cost for surveys? A rough idea? Because it's a lot of money, and
I mean, I think the details are probably in the St Anne's report, but if you want a rough idea, it's probably £250,000, £350,000 a site before you go anywhere close to building anything.
So that's your sum of money as well.
Yeah, we haven't spent that on every site, clearly. In fact, but if you wanted to know what it would cost before you can get a shovel in the ground, it's about that. Thank you, Jim.
Do any other members of the committee have any comments or questions on the review? No. So the audit committee is being asked to consider the learning from the governance review. So I take it at this stage we have done so. The recommendation is that we do it. We've obviously had 2 recommendations come forward from Councillor Spencer, which we've approved already. So what I intend to do is take a vote on the main recommendation, which is that we do consider the learning from the governance review. All those in favour of that?
That's unanimous. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we're moving on to the next agenda item, which I shall just open on ModGov. We have no further urgent business, so that was the governance review was addressed as an item of urgent business, but we have no further. So agenda item number 3 is the division of the agenda. I'm not anticipating that it's likely that we will need to divide the agenda. Agenda item number 4. Members are invited to declare any personal or disclosable pecuniary interest that they may have, including the nature and extent of such interests in any items to be considered at this meeting. Do members wish to declare any interests? No. So agenda item number 5, the external auditor appointment. I'm going to ask Councillor Pearce to introduce the external auditor appointment. Thank you, Councillor Pearce.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. This is a fairly straightforward report. Every 3 years we are required to reappoint our auditors, and the recommendation is that we should do this through the public sector audit appointments arrangement as before, and the report sets out why it thinks that is the best idea.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. Now, we also have joining us remotely Mrs. Henstock and Mrs. Buckle. Do either one of you wish to comment on this particular item with the external auditor appointment?
Thank you, Chairman. Just to say that I have spoken to the other Devon Section 151 officers, And all of the other Devon authorities are looking to go down the route of opting into the PSAA national framework. The main reason for that is so that we can get the economies of scale in terms of cost of our external audit provision. And if we were to choose the alternative route of setting up an auditor panel, it is thought that there would certainly be additional costs in terms of resource and time, but also we would be unlikely to gain those economies of scale in terms of price. So it would be very likely we would see an increase in our external costs. Currently, our external audit fees are just in the region of 54,000. Thank you.
Do any members of the Audit Committee have any questions they'd like to ask at this stage? So the recommendation is that the committee recommends to the council that South Hams District Council opts into the national arrangement for the procurement and appointment of external auditors through public sector audit appointments by the 11th of March 2022. So this is a decision that needs to be confirmed by full council, which is why we need to consider it at this point. I would move the recommendation because I believe, as Mrs. Buckle has put forward, that it's the most sensible thing for us to do at this stage. Do I have anyone to second that recommendation? Councillor Rose? All those in favour? Councillor Rose, sorry.
That's unanimous. Thank you, Chair.
Agenda item number 6. Update on progress of the 2021-22 internal audit plan. Councillor Pearce, would you like to introduce this?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm sorry it's me all the time, but you'll probably all understand that I'm standing in for Councillor Bastone as well, as he's on leave at the moment. So, as part of the internal audit reporting process, the Audit Committee receives updates on the progress made on the current year's audit plan. This is the first report for 21-22 and sets out the work carried out by internal audit up to the 5th of November against this year's audit plan, a plan that was agreed by this committee back in April. Progress has once again been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. One half of the audit team has continued to provide assistance with the processing of various business grants and other financial support made available by the government via the local authority to those who have suffered as a result of COVID. As a result, a number of audits have not taken place. However, as at the 5th of November, out of the 31 planned audits, 4 had been completed with final reports issued, 1 was at the draft report stage, and 8 were underway. In addition, final reports were issued on 5 audits from 2021 from that plan, and were being completed which were being completed at the start of the audit year. Details of all these are outlined at Appendixes A and B. Overall, and based on the work performed to date during 21-22, internal audit is able to provide reasonable assurance on the adequacy and effectiveness of the authority's internal control environment. Thank you, Chairman, and I'm sure Mr. Measures will add anything he wishes to that.
Mr. Measures, would you?
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Chair. Normally, members would have received this, the first progress report slightly earlier in the autumn, but as we know, the autumn audit committee meetings were taken up with final accounts and reports from external audit. The report is in its usual format, with Appendix A showing where we were as at the 5th of November with each audit in this year's plan. Appendix B contains details from all the final reports issued since my annual report that I presented in the summer, and covers both those audits that were carried over from last year and those that we've completed from this year's plan. It provides you with the major audit findings from each of the final reports issued since June 2021 and the responses that were received from officers to our recommendations. Please note there is a small error in the executive summary where I've said that full council had approved this year's audit plan. Of course, it was this committee that had taken that action back in April. As the leader has pointed out, internal audit has continued to feel the effects of the pandemic, and progress with the plan has been restricted. This in most part is due to Matt, one of my auditors, continuing to assist with the processing of applications for COVID business grants. And this has left my other auditor, Julie, to complete the 2021 work with it during this period and making inroads into this year's plan. But we're also liaising with officers as we go, so as to not interfere with any important COVID operations. Whilst it was hoped that Matt would return to carry out audit work on a more full-time basis, the latest position is that there is still more work on business grants to do. And of course, following yesterday's announcement from the Prime Minister with more restrictions, whether there'll be, there's calls for more grants to be issued. So we wait and see on that front. As you will see, that we've spent 142 days on unplanned COVID-related tasks, and this figure is likely to increase. You'll remember that back in July, a request was made by this committee to approach Devon Audit Partnership for additional audit resource to backfill the time lost by Matt, and this request was approved by the executive. Unfortunately, Devon Audit Partnership has lost a number of good experienced staff through retirements, etc., over the last few months, and have been undertaking a major recruitment exercise, which has led to a number of new members of staff joining, and arrangements are in hand to utilise some of these for your audit plan. It is my intention to meet with the Section 151 officer and the Director of Governance and Assurance to review the plan and to identify audits that should go ahead in the remainder of the audit year and those that could be delayed or cancelled. Usually delayed or cancelled in the face of changes in circumstance, in particular those particular areas. As the leader has said, based on the work that has been carried out today, I can give reasonable assurance on the internal control environment. I'm happy to take questions and do my best to answer them now. I also have Julie, one of my audit team, attending remotely. We may be able to assist in providing with answers, or we'll come back to you with responses in due course.
Thank you, Mr. Mergers. Councillor Spencer has a question.
Thank you. Can I ask for some clarity on Appendix A, page 24, under the heading of COVID-19 business grants post-scheme assurance?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, there is a requirement that comes with the funding for councils to undertake some post-payment assurance to make sure that systems and that the government can be assured that the money has gone to the right people. And we carried out one of these exercises at the end of, or started doing the exercise at the last March and reported at the beginning of this audit year. And we propose to do another piece of work on that front again this year, based on grants that have been paid out and that processed in this financial year.
Yeah, Councillor Spencer.
Thank you. Sorry, perhaps I've misinterpreted the heading field work started with the cross there. I'd interpreted that as that work had not started. But this is a second wave of work, because I know the government's very keen on doing postmortems on a lot of the activity that took place during the massive number of grants that were issued. Is that any priority at all, or to us?
There is a certain amount of project. If I can just say that the reason why we've got the work has started, that some of the grants and funding requires internal audit to have reviewed it. There was the compensation on the income loss, the money, the funding that came through there. We were asked by the Section 151 officer to give assurance that everything was done correctly, etc., etc. And that's what that piece of work. We weren't going to issue a report. It's just I think it was a short side of A4, an email just to Section 151 to say yes, we had, everything was done correctly, etc. As far as priorities are concerned, this work is high priority and will be carried out at the appropriate time.
Any further questions on agenda item number 6 from any members of the committee? If not, then the recommendation is before us that the progress made against this internal audit plan and any key issues arising are noted and approved. Do I have someone to propose that recommendation? Councillor Spencer proposes, seconded by Councillor Brazil. All those in favour?
That's unanimous. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Agenda item number 7 is the Sundry debt report, which again will be coming back to Councillor Pearce to introduce that.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this one really is a Councillor Bastone one, or should be. Sundry report, the Sundry debt report. I think somebody's got their microphone on, so I can hear feedback. This report gives an update on the Council's Sundry debt position at the 30th of September 2021. The arrears covered in this report are split into 3 categories as follows: Sundry debts, then housing benefit overpayment recoveries from those still in receipts of housing benefit, and then housing benefit overpayment recoveries from those no longer in receipt of housing benefit. Debt recovery was paused in the early months of 2021 following the initial COVID-19 lockdown, but all recovery procedures are now back up and running. Whilst debt has increased slightly in some areas, every effort is being made by our case management and asset teams to recover these debts and supporting customers with payment arrangement options in order to recover those debts. Chairman, if you have any, if there are any member questions, I suggest they're put to Claire Scotton or Pauline Henstock. Thank you.
Do we have any questions on that agenda? Councillor McKay.
Yeah, I've just got one question about the debt recovery. It would be nice to see a figure as to how much we spend in terms of salaries, officer time, etc., and other resources, and as a percentage of the public, and to see how much.
I can hear you, but I don't think the people on the screen can hear you.
Well, it's probably just.
So we can all hear you.
Do you want me to repeat it or?
Well, just if you could just summarise.
I just want to have an understanding of the amount of resource and cost involved in recovering debt, and is there such a thing as a ratio that gives you some sort of measure of the success and how much you spend? Sorry, that's my question.
I think that's Mrs. Buckle, isn't it? Would be able to answer that question.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So the debt recovery is in different departments. So, for example, if it's housing benefit debt, that is the housing benefit recovery is undertaken within the housing benefit team. In addition to that, we have sundry debts, which would be debts such as like our estate management. So if any of our tenants are in arrears, or environmental health invoices, such as licensing invoicing. So we don't have a central debt recovery team. The debt recovery is done within individual service areas. There isn't a ratio as such that we need X amount of staff chasing X amount of arrears as such. But obviously we continuously monitor the staff resource we have got that is recovering all of the different types of debt that the council has, and we're satisfied we've got the right amount of resource for all of that debt recovery. I mean, you can see on page 49 of the agenda, if you're looking at housing benefit, for example, there's numerous ways that we can recover that debt. If a customer is still in housing benefit entitlement, we can recover that from their future entitlement. If it's a customer that is no longer in entitlement for housing benefit, we can do things like attachment of earnings, or which is a direct process. And in terms of our letters that go out around debt recovery, we do signpost our customers to other organisations that can help them with their debts as well. So organisations such as the CAB, and also give them debt advice as well. And we can also do things like entitlement checks, so we can check that they're getting all of the benefits that they're entitled to as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Buckle. Are there any other further questions from members on item number 7? No? In which case, the Audit Committee has a recommendation that the Audit Committee note the position in relation to sundry debts. Do I have a proposer for that recommendation? Councillor Spencer, will someone second it? Councillor Taylor seconded. All those in favour?
That's 7 unanimous. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we move on to agenda item number 8, which is the Treasury Management Mid-Year Review. And again, I'll come back to Councillor Pearce to introduce it.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this is the recurring review of Treasury management. Treasury management in present circumstances is quite difficult, and you will see that the amount of interest received is slightly below the average on the market. But in present circumstances, this is extremely difficult because interest is virtually nil anywhere. And this report explains why and how things are so difficult. We do take a cautious approach following the debacle of the Icelandic banks, which now is some time ago, and we don't mention it in our reports anymore, I'm pleased to say. But I think it shook a lot of councils when it happened. And the view now is that it's far better to be very prudent and maybe earn a little less money than to be more rash and fall down a hole, as some councils did in the past. So you have the report before you, and I'm sure that any of the finance officers will be happy to answer any of your questions.
Do we have any questions from members on agenda item number 8? Yep, Councillor Spencer.
Sorry about this. I appreciate that we're in a difficult position, and the investment of anybody's money at the moment is a very, very difficult profession to be in. But I can't help noticing that if we look at page 57, you'll see that the returns on money market are maybe up to 0.01%, fixed term deposits between that number and 0.02%, and property 2.53 to 4.05, and I apologise if I got those numbers wrong, but that's looking at something like £50 million worth of investment that's actually not even achieving an inflationary rate of return. So in real terms, the value of the money that's being invested is actually reducing. And I'm not sure what you can do about that. But one thing that could be done is a review of the investment risk that you're prepared to take, if any. And that, I'm sure, has been looked at. But I just worry that future projects which might rely on any sort of funding that's currently invested are going to suffer, because the buying power of the pound that's being generated just won't be there in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, 5 years' time, or whatever. And I just wondered if there are any thoughts or comments on that.
Mrs. Buckle, would you like to come back on that?
Yes, I would. Thank you, Chairman. So yes, the Vice Chairman's exactly right. We aren't getting very much interest rate return on our fixed term deposits, all the money market funds. The feature of the money market funds and the fixed term deposits is that they are the money market funds. They are AAA rated, so they are the best. They've got the best credit rating that you can get, so equivalent really to the government, AAA rated, and that's why we do invest quite a lot of our money with the money market funds. Because our treasury management strategy is that we are looking at security first. So we are saying that the primary aim is that if we invest £1 million, our primary objective is that we get at least £1 million back again, plus some interest. So very much it is looking at security, then liquidity, how quickly can we get at that money if we need to. And that was very prevalent at the start of the pandemic, whereby because we did have we hadn't tied all our money up in long-term investments. When the pandemic hit and we were concerned about cash flow, the money market funds are very liquid. You can get your money back, within a couple of days. So that's why we tend to use the money market funds, because they are AAA rated and you can get your money back more or less within a couple of working days. Same with the debt management office, the fixed term deposits. We did have a meeting with our treasury management advisors last week. There are a couple of opportunities that we could look at investing in that are slightly longer term. They still wouldn't give you a huge amount more interest than you're getting now. In comparison to the property funds are, as you say, gaining a lot more interest. So like the average on the property fund is 4%, but then you are exposed really in terms of your capital investment. And when we've got 1.5 million invested in that property fund, you're exposed to fluctuations in the capital asset value. So on your balance sheet, that value will go up and will go down. So there is more risk, certainly, with those property funds. And when we initially looked at how much we would invest in those, we really sort of set a limit of we wouldn't want to go higher than sort of 3.5 million. We feel that's a prudent amount for an authority of our size. I wouldn't recommend increasing that, but I do take the point. Also, what the Treasury Management Advisor said was that it's probably quite unlikely now that the Bank of England will increase interest rates in December. So we think that will be early in 2022. Now that again will mean that we won't get as much on our Treasury Management investments, but it is a balance. It's a balance of risk against return. And obviously, when we set our Treasury Management strategy at Council in March, that is something as members that we can look at in terms of weighing up security, liquidity and yield. But at the moment, that is our strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Buckle. Are there any further questions from members on agenda item number 8? Councillor Rowe?
Well, it wasn't a question. Can I make a comment?
Yeah, please do.
I would comment on our investments because Councillor Pennington will remember, and possibly Councillor Brazil was here at the time, when we had money invested with the Icelandic Bank and we came unstuck. So we do have to make sure that we have our investments in safe places. Nowhere safe, but as safe as possible. And AAA, as Lisa's just explained to us, is our best solution, I feel. So I think, we're not getting a lot in return, but nobody's getting a lot in return. And the only place we'll get a good return for our money is in property at present. And that depends whether you're prepared to invest in that or not. So I think we're doing as best we can at present. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rowe. So the recommendation that is before the committee is that the Audit Committee resolves to endorse the contents of the report. Can I have someone propose that recommendation? Yeah, Councillor Rowe proposes, seconded by Councillor Spencer. All those in favour?
That's unanimous. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That's agenda item number 8. So we're moving on to agenda item number 9, which is the strategic risk update. Again, I'll come back to Councillor Pearce to introduce it.
Thank you, Chairman. Now, this is one I'm really pleased to see. And I would like to thank Mr. Hawke for all the hard work he's put into the new format that he has devised for presenting the strategic risk register. He'll take you through it, but I hope that you will find it a lot clearer than the old system, a lot more readable, and for all that, a lot more interesting, because it does show you in a much better format the direction of travel on the various risks. And it also shows you, which is really important in a risk register, actually what is likely to be causing the risk, because unless you identify what the cause of the risk is, you're unlikely either to identify it properly or to put in place the right mitigation strategy. So that is really important. So you've got the report, and I think you are going to present a new recommendation, which is fine. And Mr. Hawke will take you through the presentation style, presentation of how he is presenting the new risk register. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. Mr. Hawke, please.
Thank you, thank you, Chairman. So as Councillor Pearce says, we've taken on board the comments from previous audit committees in terms of the format of the strategic risk register, which was very much an Excel spreadsheet, and I suggest not too user friendly and very difficult to actually map the sort of trajectory of the risks over any period of time. And I think that's important that members understand the direction of any risk travel. As Councillor Pearce says, we've included within the risk register, and we will include it with all future risk registers, our scoring framework, the objectives of effective risk management within the councils, and our overall risk management process. I think skipping to page 78, our risk management treatment. I mean, as officers, it's kind of subjective in terms of the scoring of these risks, but we use the best intelligence we can to come up with a scoring for each risk at each point in time, and that's in discussion certainly through the senior leadership team. We have regular discussions about strategic risks with lead members to inform the risk register updates. And as you can see there, we set out, depending on the scoring, in terms of how likely the risk is to occur and the impact if that risk was to occur. And I think that's the important thing to say, because we've got a couple of red risks there. It's fair to say one is no longer a risk, it's an issue, and that's the risk around waste and recycling. And I think that's been discussed in a number of committees. So that's certainly an issue at the moment. But the other sort of red risks are those that the senior leadership team and lead members will be reviewing on a regular basis. So these are absolutely ones that we need to work hard to reduce. So we throw more resource at it, do whatever we need to do to reduce that level of risk to the organisation. The amber risks are ones that we will manage at the sort of director and head of service level. We'll have plans in place and we'll review those on a sort of 3 to 6 month basis. The yellow risks, slightly lower, will be monitored by heads of service and plans developed to reduce the risk and prevent any further escalation, because there are always going to be risks, and most of our risks, as you will see on the next page, are sitting within that the amber banding of the risk register. We have to accept an amount of risk if we're to succeed in achieving our priorities within the better lives for all strategy. So I think if we look at page 79, you can clearly see there the direction of travel for the risks based on the previous update to audit committee to date. So the previous update would have been about 6 months ago now. The main one to draw your attention to is risk number 6, which is business continuity. And that one has escalated from both in terms of its likelihood of occurring. So the risk of that, in terms of business continuity, your business continuity risk will always escalate as you enter a period of the year that is at risk of floods and storms and other incidents, particularly with the way we work now. We work online, and if there's a power cut, that has a huge impact on how we deliver the services. We're not in the office, we can't go and do some filing. It doesn't work like that. We lose all communications. So there will always that one will always escalate at this point of the year. But it's also because of learning in terms of the increasing number of cyber attacks on local councils. We've been understanding from other councils the impact it's had on them and ensuring that we have robust plans in place. So we're currently updating our business continuity plans, and again, it's a risk we have to accept. You know, that people will try to attack systems. That's the way it works. We have to accept that risk, but we need to ensure we've got robust plans in place for what we do in the event of a successful cyber attack. So that's why that one's escalated at this point in time, because we're currently updating plans. So I would expect the next update to Audit Committee, that risk would have reduced again, because we would have updated our business continuity plans. And yes, and we would have passed the winter storms, shall we say. So I think in terms of where we are, I'll stop there, Chairman, and take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hawke. Do we have any questions on this strategic risk review from members so far? Councillor McKay.
Climate change. Basically, the lack of reference to it, other than it being embedded in business continuity and possibly other things. I mean, there is a general risk. I mean, these are risks to the council itself, isn't it, and not to the local population. And to the council itself, I would have thought there was a growing risk in terms of its effect on its finance. And virtually every aspect of its existence, really. But and I'm surprised it's not sort of it doesn't exist as a more explicit item. That's my question or comment. Thanks.
Mr. Hawke, would you like to come back?
Thank you, Councillor McKay. I think it's fair to say it's not explicit in any of the risks, but it certainly is a feature in all of the risks. You know, if we're talking about the financial cost to the council of responding to climate change, that certainly features within the future financial resilience of the council risk. But I take on point your comment around it not being a specific risk. And certainly in January, we've got a session in with the senior leadership team to review our strategic risks, and we'll take that into consideration as part of that thinking.
Any further questions? Councillor Brazil. Yeah.
Yes, just following on from that, with the senior leadership team, when you're reviewing your strategic risks, the council is taking on the role of developer on a number of big projects with quite sizable amounts of money involved. Obviously, we've seen a massive increase in building materials, lack of supply chains, builders themselves, labourers, developers, whatever. I'm slightly concerned that with the amounts of money that we are investing, that there is no sort of recognition of that. And I hope that when the senior leadership team looks at strategic risk, when I think it's in the new year, that that's something that you can at least be discussed, so that we're aware of it.
Mr. Hawke.
Thank you, Councillor Brazil. Certainly, and this is the first point of a new risk register, and we will be evolving it over time. And certainly another section within the future risk register I would like to see to be those sort of bigger projects. So that will certainly feature in future risk registers.
Mr. Bates.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to go back to the earlier point that Mr. Hawke made about the increased risk around cybersecurity. And of course, it's one thing identifying the risk; it's another thing doing something about it. And I'd just like to remind the committee that, of course, over the last couple of months, we have had cybersecurity training rolled out for all of our staff and indeed all members. So that's the kind of mitigation we need to be taking. Also, at SLT earlier this week, in fact, yesterday, seems like a lot longer ago than that, we also reviewed the situation with regard to our FIT project, and we have taken steps to mitigate risks around that as well, Chairman. So I think it's just helpful to the risk you identified. Thank you.
Any other questions from members of the committee? No, we have a recommendation, don't we, which is that given the change in business continuity, that all members on the council will be made aware through a training session. Is that correct, Mr. Hawke?
I think it'd be more of a member briefing,
Briefing.
because there will be certain things we would like to highlight to members that we wouldn't talk about in a public session because of the nature of the risk, really.
So to clarify,
Sorry, Chair, before we move on, Councillor Hopwood's got a question.
Councillor Hop.
It's not so much a question, sorry, Chairman. It's a comment on regards to cyber security. There are, and I use this opportunity to say there are still quite a few members who haven't completed their cyber security. And listening to what Mr. Measures is saying, I hope that those members who haven't now realise how important it is that members complete this cyber security, because if they don't, we're going to have to, you know, they could literally bring the council down by clicking on something that they shouldn't click on, and the training only takes about 20 minutes. I don't like anything training wise for computers, but I found it really, really interesting. And on the back of what I hope if I can't convince members to do the training, I hope that Mr. Measures can. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Hawke, there is a recommendation that we run a training session or briefing session with members with full membership, and we're looking at doing that before February, would you say? Mr. White, there is a recommendation to go with this. There's a recommendation to go with this, that there's a full briefing of all members on this. Do you have the recommendation?
I have a proposed set of words, Chair.
Yeah, could you read those out?
Will do. It is a recommendation that the committee has considered the strategic risk register as set out in Appendix A, and in light of the escalation to the scoring in the business continuity risk, the committee requests that officers hold an all-member briefing over Teams with a specific focus on the IT and IT security elements of the risk before the end of January 2022.
Thank you. I'm happy to propose that. Do I have a second now? Councillor Spencer, second. Do any members have any questions on that? In which case I'll move to the vote. All those in favour of that recommendation?
That is unanimous. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We're also being asked as an audit committee, the recommendation is that we consider the strategic risk register as set out in Appendix A. Do I have someone to move that recommendation?
Yeah.
Councillor Spencer moves and Councillor Brazil seconds. All those in favour?
That's 7 unanimous. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That's agenda item number 9. Agenda item number 10 is the investment property update and monitoring report. And I think we're back to Councillor Pearce for that.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just checking on whether we needed to go into part 2, but I don't think we do at this moment. So this report is an update on the 2 commercial properties the council holds. One is at Lee Mill, and the other one is the property purchased in 2019 in Dartmouth. You'll see that together they are raising a satisfactory amount of money for the council, and that it appears that everything is well with both properties. But Mr. Brooke will answer any questions on this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Pearce. Mr. Brooke, would you like to introduce it?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, there isn't a huge amount to consider. Tesco Lee Mills is obviously a site that we've had in our ownership for a very long time and continues to perform well. The site that was acquired in 2019 is doing everything we hoped it would do. They've been valued, and you can see that there's not a huge change to the valuation. Although I would remind members that the valuation is theoretical because we hold it as an income earning asset, and the rent remains to be received. So we have no debts outstanding on the 2 investment items. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions from members of the committee? Yeah, Councillor McKay, remember to switch the mic on.
It's just an oddity that it says at the top, not for publication. This is an exempt information, and it's in the public. It's on the public site.
That's the appendix.
Sorry,
It's Appendix 1.
Mr. Brooke, would you like to answer that? Do you know that you?
So thank you, Jim. Just for its point of clarity, there is exempt material, but it's in Appendix 1.
Oh, applies to Appendix 1. Sorry, okay, I didn't read. Yes, okay. Sorry.
Councillor Brazil, did you have a question?
Yeah, I do. I just, maybe I misheard that, but I think I heard Mr. Brooks say that there was no debt outstanding. I mean, was that on the Tesco Lee Mill? Because obviously we do have a debt outstanding on, because, well, we got borrowings in the region of 5 million for the Dartmouth. Just a clarification on that.
Yeah. Mr. Brooke, would you like to?
Yeah, no, thank you. My reference to the debt, was to do with the rent collection. So the rent collection is up to date, so there's no rent debt. But you're absolutely correct. The asset in Dartmouth is owned and does have debt against it. Thank you for the clarification.
Any further questions?
Yes, I do. First of all, on the and stop me if I'm hoping I'm not going to go into part two. So the property that we have in Dartmouth, obviously it's the lease that we've got with the tenant at the moment has a certain amount of time to run. When that lease is up, do we then take control of the flats above it as well?
Mr. Brooke?
So yes, it's structured such that we have one arrangement with one tenant, and the tenant currently manages the flats above it. When depending on how the arrangements go when that lease is up in 10 years' time, so they might renew, in which case the position will probably remain as it is, because that's the least amount of faff, for want of a better word, from our perspective. We have one tenant to deal with, which is M&S. But yeah, it could theoretically be a different tenant on the ground floor, and we could have tenants directly in the houses above. That is possible. But we would be a freehold owner only of those flats, in so much as they have agreements, so they have ASTs already in place. So we're not suddenly about to evict everybody and have the homes, I suppose, is my point.
No, that's fine. I mean, I just say, because I mean, I don't know what, they're sublet, so it's not under our control, but obviously rental values in the past year and a half have just skyrocketed in this area, and yet we don't seem to be getting any financial benefit out of that at all. I just wondered if the way that the contract or the purchase was structured means that what I don't want to happen is if suddenly there's a property crash and the rents go down, that we suddenly find that we're having to pick up the slack on that, whereas but we're not getting any benefit now where we could, obviously, because I would have thought there's at least a 10-15% uplift in rental value, if not more. That's so that's that one question on that. On the other one is that I know that we put in 10% of our rental income into an MMRM reserve. Do we do any such thing with our property at Lee Mill? Does that have a reserve for that? I know obviously it's got another 58 odd years to run, so I doubt many of us will be around to see it. But
Mr. Brooke, you'd like to come back on both of those?
Thank you, Chairman. Good questions both. So yes, the rent, there's a rent review in place. As part of the lease, there is a term that allows us to see a change in the rent with our tenants, and the rental income that they're receiving from their sublet is part of that. And the rent reviews are 5-yearly, upwards only, whichever is the greater of market. So essentially, at the point where we do the rent review, if there is additional income being received, we will see a benefit from that. If rent decreases, as in the market fluctuates negatively, we are protected from that. So it isn't quite how you set it out. It's actually a better position, I think, from the rental perspective. And no, we don't keep a specific reserve against the mill, because it's just land rather than a building that needs maintenance, and we don't have debt against it. So what we do have essentially is a much bigger budget associated with our R&M budget, which is well in excess of £1 million a year. And that is how we manage and mitigate the risks on the rest of our assets. But we take a very specific and cautious approach to assets that we hold with significant levels of debt against them. So it's over and above what we would do for our other assets. I hope that helps.
Any further questions?
Yes, sorry, Chair. Yeah, it's really, I suppose I would say what's not in this report, because, it's no surprise to anyone that I've been slightly exercised about the amount of money that we spent on the wind turbines that then went belly up. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily wrong, and I'm sure that we needed to do all those checks and etc. But I am slightly concerned that that money, that 150,000, was delegated to officers to spend, and yet the specific thing in our governance says that when we're in a hurry for it. Well, the fact that money was spent over 2 different years, financial years, sort of gives the impression that there wasn't actually a great deal of haste required. It wasn't a buy it or leave it. It took us a considerable amount of time. So that concerns me slightly. And I wonder if this may not be the right paper or the right time. But I do think we need to reassess the governance arrangements over our property investments. I mean, what I will say is obviously the Ivy Bridge regeneration and the amount of money that we are fronting at risk if it all goes belly up, 450. I mean, I didn't agree with it myself, but it did come to full council and it was ratified at full council. So there's like an audit trail of people judge the risk themselves as members, it's taxpayers' money, and they decided that was a risk worth taking. With that particular one with the wind turbine, that never came to us. There was never any paper other than at the end it went, well, we've lost 150,000. It was 150,000 pounds on it, and that just makes me slightly uneasy. I hope that's sort of clear.
Mr. Brook, would you like to come back on any of that?
Well, Chairman, I'm happy to. So the existing scheme of delegation is to the executive. That is how the commercial investment strategy is structured. So that is obviously something that will always continue to be in review, but rightly it's an executive function, and the delegated scheme of approval to the executive was a report to council. Thank you.
Thank you. Do any other members have any questions on agenda item number 10?
Yeah. I don't like contradicting officers. But the truth is that the commercial investment acquisitions, that spending of that £150,000 never came to an executive meeting. It could have been called into scrutiny if it had. I'm not saying it would have, and I'm at no stage am I saying it was wrong or whatever. I think maybe it was right, but I just think there's something wrong. So. The other thing is that if it's outside of, it says here that the scheme of delegation says the council will delegate the authority and decision-making function relating to commercial inquisitions in the South of out of the area to the head of paid service and section 151 of the state in consultation with the executive members. And then it says when it actually happens, a report will be presented for noting purposes to the subsequent meeting of the executive. In other words, at no stage is that decision able to be scrutinised, in the sense that scrutiny can't, if it's a noting, you can't, it's been said it's okay. So that's the issue that I've got with it. I know it's slightly detailed, and I'm sorry if it's sort of complex, and I'm muddling a bit myself. But the truth is the executive we do not delegate the power to the executive in these particular circumstances. We had an example where £150,000 was spent and went by the by, and we as members outside it didn't know anything about that until it had happened. And at no stage could that decision have been scrutinised by other members of the council. And I think that's fundamentally something that's wrong. And that we should look at the governance arrangements again and make sure that isn't the case.
Thank you, Councillor Brazil. Mrs. Buckle has been waiting patiently while you've been speaking then.
Sorry, Chairman, I think the leader was before me. Thank you.
Councillor Pearce.
I'd been happy for Mrs. Buckle to speak first, but all I was going to say to Councillor Brazil was that it is correct that often decisions have to be taken quickly. And whilst it was actually not wind turbines, as I remember it, it was solar panels. But the decisions that had to be taken fairly quickly. And there is a policy that governs commercial investments of this kind, and all policies, as you know, have to go to council. So that would have been the time to say that you didn't agree with it. Now, as it happens, because what's happened with the Public Works Loan Board and commercial investments elsewhere by other councils that far outstrip anything we've done, whether quickly or slowly or whatever, I don't think that we will be doing any pure commercial investments ever again, though we may well be doing regeneration projects such as in Ivy Bridge. So that's what I wanted to say in response to what Councillor Brazil says, but I'm very happy now to defer to Mrs. Buckle.
Mrs. Buckle, would you like to comment?
Thank you, Leader, and through you, Chairman. Yes, I think the relevant part of the report is in 3.6, which is on page 90. And there is a link there to the scheme of delegation which was approved by full council on the 19th of December in 2019. That was minute reference CM 5319. And what that link shows is that strategy was for investment properties, but also was for renewable energy opportunities. So that scheme of delegation did include renewable energy opportunities, and therefore the solar scheme did go through that process and that scheme of delegation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Buckle. Do members of the committee have any other further questions regarding agenda item number 10? No, well, the recommendation is that we note the valuation figures of the council's 2 investment properties and the rental income being received. Do I have someone to propose that? Councillor Spencer, and seconded by Councillor McCain. All those in favour?
That's 7 unanimous. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we move on to the next agenda item, which is our final agenda item of the Audit Committee Works Programme, which is on the final page of the standard agenda. And we have a slight issue in terms of the 10th of March in the length of different subjects coming before the committee. So we have a recommendation, I believe, Mr. White. Do you have it that you could read it out?
I do, Chair. In effect, due to the length of the agenda for that meeting, we are suggesting that the meeting is split into a morning and afternoon agenda, with a morning session starting at 11 before breaking for lunch, with then an afternoon session. So the committee's happy for that. We will make the necessary updates to the calendar invitation.
So just for members, just to clarify for members, that would mean on the 10th of March, when we would normally start at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, because of the sheer amount of stuff that we're looking at on March's meeting for the Audit Committee, that what we're proposing is that we start at 11 o'clock in the morning instead of 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So we'll run for an hour and a half to 2 hours, then take a break where members will be given lunch, and then we'll come back after half an hour, 45 minutes to finish off with the whole of the rest of the agenda. That should mean that the meeting on the 10th of March doesn't end up finishing at something like 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. So do you have the recommendation to read it out to clarify it again, Mr. White? Actually written down?
The committee resolves to reset its start time for its 10th of March meeting date for an 11 a.m. start time with a morning and afternoon agenda contained within.
Thank you. So I would move that recommendation. Do I have a seconder for it? Councillor Taylor seconds. All those in favour?
That's unanimous. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 11 is the last on the agenda. So I'd like to thank you all for attending and close the meeting at what is pretty much slap on 3:30.